A very good morning to you all, respected doctors. It's indeed my pleasure and privilege to welcome you all at IPCA for this very interesting webinar on this Sunday morning. For today's webinar, we have galaxy of faculties from a vibrant city of India, that is Hyderabad. Today's meeting will be moderated by a very respected cardiologist from South India, Dr. Rajiv Garg sir. We also have very learned faculties from different specialty. We have Dr. V. Mukesh Rao as a senior cardiologist, Dr. J. Nagendra Reddy sir as an endocrinologist, and Dr. Pramod Kumar sir, a senior physician. Heartiest welcome to you all, sir. It's my proud privilege to introduce today's moderator and speaker, a senior cardiologist, Dr. Rajiv Garg sir, to you. Dr. Rajiv Garg sir is a MD Medicine, DIPCARD, DNB, and MNAMS. Sir is having a lot of prestigious fellowship, that is fellowship from American College of Cardiology, European Society of Cardiology, and Society of Coronary Angiography and Intervention. Sir is an interventional cardiologist and head Department of Cardiology at Aware Gleneagles Global Hospitals at Hyderabad. Sir is an ex-consultant cardiologist at Yashoda Super Specialty Hospital, Hyderabad. Sir is a life member of API, CSI, ICIC, and PCSI. Sir has presented 6 papers in different national conferences. Sir is also associated with different clinical trials like FAMI, that is Fragment in Acute Myocardial Infarction, Rivera, that is Registry on Intravenous Anticoagulation in the Elective and Primary Real World of Angioplasty, Enoxaparin in PCI. Sir is also principal investigator in Nicorandil OD preparation phase 3 trials. And today, Dr. Rajiv Garg sir will be speaking on a topic, diuretics role in hypertension treatment. Then we have Dr. V. Mukesh Rao sir with us. Sir is also MD Internal Medicine and DM in Cardiology, FSCC, FSCAI, FESC. Sir is a senior interventional cardiologist at Aware Gleneagles Global Hospitals at Hyderabad. And sir is also assistant professor at KMC Hospital, associate professor at SVIMC Tirupati, was there. And V. Mukesh Rao sir will be speaking on a topic, management of comorbid conditions in hypertensive patients. Then we have another speaker, that is Dr. J. Nagendra Reddy sir. Sir is a DM endocrinologist and is a gold medalist in MD, that is in general medicine. When he was doing in MD, he got a gold medal. Sir is a consultant endocrinologist in Sri Krishna Diabetes and Endocrine Center at Hyderabad. Sir is an ex-head of Department of Endocrinology at KAMS and RC Hyderabad. Sir is a life member of Endocrine Society of India, and sir has also got a fellowship from Endocrine Society. Dr. Nagendra sir has won the Best Medico Award from RBVRH in the year 2005. And he also got a gold medal during his MD. And Dr. Nagendra sir will be speaking on a topic, diabetes management during current COVID era. Then we also have a senior physician, Dr. Pramod Kumar sir with us. Next slide, please. Yeah. Dr. Pramod Kumar sir is a senior physician. He is working at a Krishnavalli Multi-Speciality Hospitals at Hayat Nagar. Sir is an ex-associate professor at Deccan College of Medical Sciences. And he is a ETV Suchibhava health educator also. And Dr. Pramod sir will be speaking on a topic, home BP monitoring. So with this introduction of the speaker, I hand over the session to today's moderator, Dr. Rajiv Garg sir. Sir, please.
Thank you, Mr. Avinash, for giving us an opportunity to interact with our audience. We have a galaxy of our speakers, Dr. Nagendra, Mukesh, and Dr. Pramod. I hope it will be interactive. And without wasting much time, let us go on our slides. My topic is diuretics in modern era. And diuretics role in management of hypertension. So let us go on my topic. and we will start with what is the worldwide burden of hypertension. It is one of the leading cause of mortality, has lots of complications which will develop rapidly and cause to a leading cause of death around the globe. The prevalence of cardiovascular disease is increased to 2 to 3 folds in patients with hypertension compared to normotensives. 69% of individuals who had a first MI will have hypertension. 77% of those who had first stroke will have hypertension. 70% of those who had heart failure will have hypertension in their history. What are the benefits of achieving goal BP as said by the various organizations? Large number of clinical trials support these figures, and dramatic associated result in reduction of MI 20 to 25%, stroke 35 to 40%, heart failure more than 50%, renal failure more than 50%, as quoted by Neil et al. In Lancet. So achieving BP goals is a very mandatory thing in the present day practice to avoid and reduce the risk of MI, stroke, heart failure, and subsequent renal failure. Now, these are the goals set by ACC/AHA 2017 guidelines. So we should divide our patients in either of these conditions. Patients with clinical evidence of coronary vascular disease or a 10-year ASVD, atherosclerotic coronary vascular disease risk of more than 10%. If their BP exceeds 130 by 80, our goal should be to reduce it to 130 by 80. If they do not have clinical evidence of coronary vascular disease and a 10-year risk of ASVD less than 10%, we can wait for some time and start our BP treatment when the BP exceeds 140/90. Our goal is to get it to less than 130/80. Older patients, that is more than 65, non-institutionalized, ambulatory, community living adults, more than 130 systolic, should aim at less than 130 systolic. Now, if they have a specific comorbid conditions associated, if it is diabetes, you should start our treatment early, that is at 130/80, and aim at 130 by 80, less than 130 by 80. If they have CKD, again start the treatment at 130 by 80 and aim at goal less than 130 by 80. Then after renal transplant in CKD patients, also the goal will be 130 by 80. In heart failure, stable ischemic heart disease, again the goals are same. But secondary stroke prevention, we can start at 140/90 and aim at less than 130 by 80. Secondary stroke prevention and peripheral arterial disease, again we should start treating the hypertension if it is above 130/80. So we have seen most of the blood pressures, if you go through the guidelines, tell us that we should start treating blood pressure if it exceeds 130/80 and should aim at a level less than 130 by 80. Now, what are the main classes of antihypertensive available in our armamentarium? We have angiotensin receptor blockers, which are the most commonly used drugs. Among them, losartan, telmisartan, olmesartan, and nowadays azilsartan have a big role in achieving BP goals. We have ACE converting enzymes, ramipril and lisinopril. We have beta blockers if the patient have associated coronary artery disease, and a small community in India who are sympathetic drive, whose sympathetic drive is more. We can use beta blockers in form of metoprolol, bisoprolol, or carvedilol. We have calcium channel blockers, amlodipine, cilindapine, and nowadays we have azildapine. Diuretics, we have chlorthalidone and hydrochlorothiazide. We'll be focusing today on the role of diuretics. They are the first line therapy in hypertension. They constitute cornerstone for management of hypertension for several decades. They are recommended as first line therapy, especially because a network meta-analysis found low dose diuretics to be most effective first line therapy to prevent cardiovascular complications. Now, what are the different class of diuretics? It's a busy slide. We'll try to summarize it. So the group of diuretics what we have are thiazides, thiazide-like diuretics, which are most commonly used, chlorthalidone, indapamide. potassium-sparing diuretics, thiamethamine and amiloride. Aldosterone antagonist, we have spironolactone and epinephrine, and loop diuretics in form of furosemide and torsemide. So let us take the indications of each. Thiazide group of diuretics are most commonly used in nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, if they are milder forms of edema, if the patient has history of renal calcium stones. They are contraindicated in patients allergic to sulfa and presence of gout. The most common side effect with this diuretic is orthostatic hypotension, decreased sodium and potassium and magnesium levels. It can cause metabolic alkalosis. It can cause increase in serum calcium, uric acid, glucose, cholesterol, triglycerides. It can cause erectile dysfunction and lithium accumulation. So we have to be careful, and if such symptoms occur, we have to stop the diuretic. Thiazide-like diuretics, which are most commonly used, chlorthalidone and indapamide, they are used in hypertension and resistant hypertension cases. They are also not to be used in patients having sulfa allergy and gout. They also have same side effects as thiazide-like diuretics. Second group of drugs are potassium-sparing diuretics. The most common one is triamterene and amiloride. They are used in patients with potassium and magnesium loss, especially the Liddle syndrome. The most common side effect of this drug is they can cause hyperkalemia when they are concomitantly used with ACE and ARBs and in advanced renal failure pregnancy, especially if you use triamterene. So we should be very careful in monitoring the serum electrolytes when we use these diuretics. It can cause hyperkalemia. It can cause nausea, flatulence, skin rash. It can cause gynecomastia and decreased libido in men with spironolactone. Then we have the famous MRSA, spironolactone, and now second generation epinephrine. They are used in patients with hypertension and potassium magnesium loss. They are used in resistant hypertension, the definition of which is when we fail to achieve BP targets with 3 drugs, one of them is a diuretic. It is used in primary aldosteronism. It is used in other ventricular access congestive heart failures. The last group, which are very effective, age-old diuretic furosemide and the newer one torsemide. They are to be used when the GFR falls below 30 ml per minute. They are contraindicated in sulfa, gout, and pregnancy. They can cause metabolic abnormalities and electrolyte abnormalities. Now, coming to the site of action, this is our famous Ganong diagram of the kidney, the cortex, medulla, the proximal convoluted tube, straight part, loop, distal convoluted tubule, and how the urine exits through the collecting duct. Mannitol acetamide, though not commonly used nowadays, act on the proximal convoluted tubule and the proximal straight tubule. The thiazide-like diuretics and metolazone act on the same segment. The furosemide, butamide, and ethacranic acid act on the ascending loop of Henle. The amiloride, spironolactone, and triamterene act at the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct. So these are the levels of action of our diuretics what we are using. Now, what is the place of diuretics in hypertension guidelines? How the history evolved? World Health Organization in 2003 preferred thiazidic type of diuretics in the management of hypertension. Then, if you are managing hypertension in black patients, 2010 guidelines say the drug of choice is thiazide with calcium channel blockers. If you go through the NICE guidelines of England, 2011, patients more than 55 years or Afro-American or Caribbean origin, thiazide diuretics, if calcium channel blockers are not suitable, is the drug of choice. If there is evidence of edema or intolerance, risk of heart failure, these are the drugs of choice. ESC 2013 recommendation allowed selection of 5 classes of medication in which thiazide diuretic was on the top. Other class include ACE, ARB, calcium channel blockers, and beta blockers. The SHEP guidelines 2014, 4 agents were considered in which thiazide type of diuretics was included. Others include beta blockers, ACE, and calcium channel blockers. Then the famous JNC 8, where there was an upgradation of diuretics in the use of hypertension, 2014. Amongst the 4 classes mentioned for management, the first line of treatment was thiazide diuretics, then ACE, ARB, and calcium channel blockers. Then the Australian guidelines 2016 again emphasized the use of thiazide type of diuretics in the management of hypertension. So if you go worldwide, most of the guidelines recommend them as one of the best drugs in management of hypertension. Most appropriate first-line antihypertensive therapy as per Indian guidelines 2019 published in JAPI. Diuretics are the drugs of choice in heart failure, elderly person, and systolic hypertension. Probably you can use in diabetics also. According to ACC AHA 2017 guidelines, the dosages what are permitted, thiazide and thiazide-like diuretics, chlorthalidone should be used in dose of 12.5 to 25 with a OD frequency. That's how chlorthalidone scored on the basis of prolonged half-life and proven trial of cardiovascular disease. Hydrochlorothiazide in dose of 25 to 30 once a day. Indapamide and metlazone 1.25 to 2.5 and 2.5 to 10 milligrams respectively. While using thiazide or thiazide type of diuretics, we have to be careful to monitor hyponatremia, hypokalemia, uric acid, and calcium channel. You should use in caution with patients of acute gout unless the patient is on uricosuric drug. The loop diuretics, furosemide used in 20 to 80 milligrams, torsemide 5 to 10 milligrams. For torsemide, which can be once a day, furosemide has to be twice a day. They are the preferred diuretics in patients with heart failure, and they are preferred over thiazide if the CKD patients with GFR of less than 30 ml per minute. Amiloride and triamterene doses are 5 to 10 and 50 to 100 milligrams, 1 to 2 times a day. They can be used as monotherapy. Combination with potassium sparing diuretics with thiazides can be considered in patients with hypokalemia. Epinephrine and spironolactone 50 to 100 milligrams twice a day. They are preferred for primary aldosteronism and resistant hypertension. Spironolactone is associated with great risk of gynecomastia, which is the most common side effect, and hence nowadays we are preferring to use epinephrine. They are commonly added to the therapy of resistant hypertension. We should avoid using potassium supplements or potassium sparing diuretics, or significant renal dysfunction is there, used with caution. Epinephrine often is to be given twice a day rather than once a day. According to ESC/ESH, European Society of Cardiology and Hypertension 2018 guidelines, chlorthalidone and indapamide have used in number of RCT showing cardiovascular benefits, and these agents are more potent per milligram than hydrochlorothiazide. So always debatable, but chlorthalidone scores over hydrochlorothiazide. Both thiazides and thiazide diuretics are effective antihypertensive agents in patients with reduced eGFR up to 45 ml per minute, but they tend to become ineffective if there is less than 30 ml per minute per 1.73 meters square. And in such circumstances, we have to resort to loop diuretics, especially furosemide or torsemide. Cochrane analysis, they are the most trusted evidence for decision making, tells thiazide is the best first choice of hypertension medicine. Most of the evidence demonstrated that first line low dose diuretic reduce mortality, stroke, heart attack. No other class improved health outcomes better than low dose thiazide type of diuretics. So thiazide and thiazide-like diuretics are included in the first line of treatment in most of the guidelines. The National Clinical Guidelines, thiazide-like diuretics preferred over thiazide diuretics. In resistant hypertension, increased dose of thiazide-like diuretics if the potassium is more than 4.5 millimoles per liter. Use spironolactone. National Heart Foundation of Australia preferred thiazide. No instructions to change diuretic treatment, only you should add spironolactone. Hypertensive Society of Canada 2016 told thiazides, but no longer thiazide-like diuretics are preferred. No instructions were given to change the diuretic treatment. Latin America 2017, thiazide diuretics, indapamide and chlorthalidone equally recommended. No instructions were given to change diuretic treatment. ACC 2017, thiazide but chlorthalidone was preferred. Maximize diuretic effect. European Society of Cardiology and European Society of Hypertension, 2018, thiazide and thiazide-like diuretics are equally recommended. Add low dose spironolactone, increase the dose of thiazide if intolerance to spironolactone develops. So these were mentioned in the Journal of Hypertension 2019 and the article written by Michael Brunner. Thiazide diuretics are the initial choice as per ACC/AHA 2017 guidelines. One of the drugs indicated as the basis for antihypertensive therapy in ESC/EHA guidelines 2018. All antihypertensive drugs, ACE, ARB, beta blockers, CCB, diuretics, have demonstrated effective reduction of blood pressure and cardiovascular events in randomized controlled trials and are indicated as basis for antihypertensive strategies. Thiazide-like diuretics, chlorthalidone, have an edge over thiazide diuretics because of structural differences, because of pharmacokinetic and dynamic advantages, dual mode of action, effective BP control, large trials to back up their results, large number of meta-analysis to back up their results. They are recommended in most of the guidelines. They have pleiotropic effort, and expert opinion definitely differs, but are preferred drug of choice. They have a better adverse profile and survival benefit. So what are the thiazide type diuretics? They are chlorthalidone and hydrochlorothiazide. Thiazide-like diuretics, chlorthalidone and indapamide. We should remember this. Chlorthalidone is one of the most studied drugs. Indapamide also is equally studied. Chlorthalidone was the initial choice in ACC/AHA 2017 guidelines, making thiazide diuretics, especially chlorthalidone or CCB, as the best choice for single drug therapy. Update of clinical guidelines 18 and 34 hypertension. If a diuretic is to be initiated or changed, offer a thiazide-like diuretic chlorthalidone in dose of 12.5 to 25 milligrams in preference to conventional diazide therapy, hydrochlorothiazide. And the studies which back up this are the ALL-HAT trial, that is antihypertensive and lipid-lowering treatment in prevent heart attack trial. Then Mr. Fit trial, multiple risk factor, and SHEP trial, systolic hypertension in elderly, all supported the use of chlorthalidone. Chlorthalidone has a better 24-hour and nighttime BP control than hydrochlorothiazide. You can just see the red is chlorthalidone and blue is hydrochlorothiazide, and you can just see office BP reduction is better, 24 BP reduction is better, and nighttime BP reduction is definitely better with chlorthalidone over hydrochlorothiazide. And you can see 24-hour BP control with chlorthalidone, it is always better than hydrochlorothiazide. So this is the ambulatory BP tracing, and these are the nighttime 24 hours and office BP tracings, which show chlorthalidone is definitely better, as published by Mercilli et al. In JACC 27, 2015. Now the systolic BP reduction with chlorthalidone was almost 14 millimeters in isolated systolic hypertension compared to 10 in indapamide group. Nighttime BP control 13.5 reduction versus 5, and 69% of people reach systolic BP goal with chlorthalidone compared to 61. The early morning protection was better with chlorthalidone, no evidence for indapamide. The CV reduction 34% in SHEP trial versus 23%. Stroke reduction 36% in SHEP trial versus 30% in HIVIT trial. And mortality reduction of 28% versus 21% in HIVIT and MRFIT respectively. So chlorthalidone is definitely superior to indapamide in management of hypertension. Heavy hearts, like heavy clouds in the sky, are the best relieved by letting a little of water, as told by Christopher Morley. Let me finish my talk here and hand over the session to the second speaker, Dr. Mukesh, and we will then go to the next talk by Dr. Pramod and Nagendra, and then we'll have a discussion. I think that is the format decided by our sponsor, and let us follow that, I think. Over to Dr. Mukesh.
Yeah, a warm good afternoon, and to all of you. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible, Mukesh.
Yeah, I'm just sharing my slides. Hope my slides are visible here.
Yeah, they're visible.
Yeah, thank you, Raju. Thank you, other speaker. Thank you, IPCA, for arranging this webinar on hypertension. So there will be a few overlap of slides that Raju Garg has already covered. So I'll be skipping. And then my topic is management of comorbid conditions in hypertensive patients. So we all know that earlier the goal is to reduce the hypertension. So it will reduce the whatever is the drug you use. By reducing hypertension itself, the risk is lowered. As the concepts have changed, now we are looking at beyond BP lowering for other benefits. So the whole idea is to treat hypertension along with other comorbid conditions as well, to give maximum morbidity and mortality benefits to the population. So if you look at the epidemiological transition in the 20th century, there is a fall in deaths and disability from communicable diseases till this pandemic of corona has come. An increase in non-communicable diseases are increasing. Of the NCDs, cardiovascular disease is now the leading cause of mortality and morbidity worldwide. If you look at the global burden, this is the number one leading cause of deaths and disability for age-adjusted life years globally. The global number of deaths from CVD has increased during the past decade by 12.5%. And CVD now accounts for approximately 1/3 of all deaths globally. So hypertension is the major cause of cardiovascular disease. Worldwide, 3 in 10 deaths are caused by CVD, and half of all the CVD deaths are caused by hypertension alone. So WHO mentions that every 20/10 millimeters rise in blood pressure can lead to double the cardiac risk. So worldwide, raised blood pressure is estimated to cause 7.5 million deaths and about 12.8% of total all deaths. This accounts for 57 million disability-adjusted life years, or 3.7% of total. Impact of comorbidities. The comorbidities impact healthcare outcomes such as mortality, health-related quality of life, and quality of healthcare. Presence of comorbidities lead to a more complex medical management of patients. Comorbidities are often associated with increased healthcare costs. So common comorbidities are associated with hypertension are cardiovascular disease, diabetes, dyslipidemia, obesity, renal disease, hyperuricemia, hypertension. Every 2 out of 3 patients have comorbidities. So hypertension is twice as common in diabetics. The new onset of diabetes is 2.5 times more in hypertension. 20 to 40% of IGT patients have hypertension. 40 to 50% of type 2 diabetics have hypertension. Only 1/4 of hypertension is diabetic, and diabetes is controlled.
Moderator, I have finished my talk. There are 4 more.
Diabetes plus hypertension increases cardiovascular risk in 3-fold. Hypertension, dyslipidemia, the high burden of cardiovascular deaths. So 3,70,000 deaths due to BP higher than normal, that is above 150. 3,50,000 deaths due to cholesterol higher than normal, that's above 250. 58% of CVD burden is due to BP or high cholesterol than optimal. So the risk of stroke in hypertensive subjects are 3 to 4 more times likely to have stroke than normotensives. Every 2 millimeters rise in systolic blood pressure in middle life is associated with 10% increase in risk of stroke. Intracerebral hemorrhage is the most common form of hypertension in the elderly and a major risk factor for stroke and cardiovascular disease. Early discontinuation of the antihypertensive treatment is associated with 30% increase in risk of stroke. So the next is the renal parenchymal disease prevalence in hypertension. Focal glomerular sclerosis is about 75 to 80%. Diabetic nephropathy also 65 to 75%. And all other forms, remember MPGN, MSGN, IgA nephropathy. Hypertension affects almost 30% of the general adult population and up to 90% of those with CKD. Strong relationship between hypertension and CAD. So effect of potentially modifiable risk factors associated with myocardial infarction across 52 countries in the Interheart study has shown that blood pressure incidence of among other risk factors, it affects almost 25% of the population. Attributable risk of myocardial infarction can be accounted for hypertension. Registry-based study over 1 million patients showed that Angina MI accounted for almost 4 to 43% of CVD-free years life in hypertension due to the next 30 years. Management of comorbidities associated with hypertension. So this slide has already been shared. So if you look grossly that whatever is the comorbid conditions, the target BP should be less than 130/80. So that is the important number. We have to maintain the patient blood pressure, whether it is diabetes, CKD, heart failure, CAD, stroke, whatever is the situation, the blood pressure target should, the goal of treatment should be below 130/80. Initiate at those target levels and maintain below 130/80. So this is European Society Guidelines 2018. Between the ages of 18 to 65 years, hypertension with diabetes, CKD, CAD, stroke, the blood pressure should be below 130, but they mentioned it should not be too low, below 120. And diastolic should be in the ranges of 70 to 79. Same patients with 65 to 79 years. So you maintain between 130 to 139, not below 130, if tolerated. Otherwise, 140 is also okay. Above 80 years, again, 130 to 139 in hypertension with other comorbid conditions. Diastolic, of course, should not be lowered below 70 or for the J curve phenomenon. So that remains same across all subsets. So if you look at the algorithm by American College of Cardiology 2017 guidelines, this is basically out of sprint data. So hypertension with SIHD, the reduced blood pressure to below 130/80. So we can use either beta blockers, ACE inhibitors, or ARBs as class 1. BP goal not met, or if they have angina, then you should add dihydropyridine calcium channel blockers. It's class 1 indication. If there's no angina, you can use either thiazides or other calcium channel blockers or MRAs. So drug treatment strategy for hypertension and CAD in this European Society guidelines. So the initial therapy should be a combination of ACE inhibitors plus beta blockers because they have associated coronary artery disease. A single pill strategy of a combination drugs, either ASARB plus beta blocker or calcium channel blocker or diuretic. Consider monotherapy in low grade or stage 1 hypertension. If it is stage 2, or you can do a combination of 2 drugs. In step 2, the BP is not controlled, that is target not achieved below 130/80. You should go to triple combination. Consider initiating therapy when BP is more than 130 in these very high risk patients with established CVD. Step 3 is 2 pills. The combination, triple combination plus spironolactone or other drug. In resistant hypertension, you can add spironolactone 25 to 50 milligrams OD or other diuretic or alpha blocker or beta blocker. Consider referral to a specialist hypertension center for further investigation. Management of hypertension with heart failure. So in adults at increased risk of heart failure, the optimal BP in those with hypertension should be less than 130/80. In peripheral vascular disease, adult hypertension, the PAD should be treated similarly to patients with hypertension without PAD. This is again hypertension with chronic kidney disease, 2017 ACC/AHA guidelines. So BP goal should be less than 130/80. If albuminuria is more than 300 mg per gram creatinine, ACE inhibitors is class 1A indication. If ACE inhibitor intolerant, you should go to ARBs. Drug treatment strategies for hypertension and CKD, European Society Guidelines 2018. In CKD patients, again, initial therapy should be dual combination. If the BP is on the higher side, you can use as ACE or ARB with CCB combination here. Or you can add a diuretic, preferably a loop diuretic. Beta blockers can be considered at any treatment step when there is a specific indication for their use, like heart failure, angina, MI, AF, younger women, or planning pregnancy. Step 2, triple combination ACE, ARB plus CCB plus diuretic or loop diuretic. Triple combination, step 3, 2 pills. You should add spironolactone by monitoring potassium carefully and a dose of 25 to 50 milligrams OD or other diuretics or alpha blocker or beta blocker. A reduction in EGFR and rise in serum creatinine is expected in those with CKD who receive BP lowering therapy, especially in those treated with ACE or ARB, but a rise in serum creatinine more than 30% should prompt evaluation of the patient for possible renovascular disease. Management of hypertension with acute ICH. ACC-AHA 2017 guidelines. Acute less than 6 hours from symptom onset of spontaneous ICH. BP should be between 150 to 200. So systolic BP lowering, it should be targeted to below, should not be below 140. There will be little harm there. If it is above 220, systolic BP lowering with continuous IV infusion or with close BP monitoring is required. That is level class 2A indication. What about hypertension in ischemic stroke? So in acute less than 72 hours from symptom onset, ischemic stroke and elevated BP, patients qualifies for IV thrombolytic therapy. So if the patient is qualified for IV thrombolytic therapy, BP should be lowered to below 185, diastolic should be less than 110, and before initiating thrombolysis, and maintain below 180, 105 for the first 24 hours after thrombolysis. The patient is not a candidate, then BP lowering should be targeted. Lower BP by 15% during the first 24 hours. If the BP is below 220, 110, initiating or reinitiating a treatment of hypertension within the first 48 to 72 hours after an ischemic stroke is ineffective to prevent death or dependency. For pre-existing hypertension, reinitiate antihypertensive drugs after neurological stability, class 2A level of evidence. Management of hypertension with diabetes, class 1. In adults with diabetes and hypertension, antihypertensive drug treatment should be initiated at a BP of 130/80 or higher, with treatment goal of less than 130/80. Adults with diabetes and hypertension, all first-line classes of antihypertensive agents, diuretics, ACE inhibitors, ARBs, CCBs are useful and effective. In adults with diabetes and hypertension, ACE inhibitors or ARBs may be considered in the presence of albuminuria. Management of hypertension in COVID-19 era due to lockdown. The challenges are regular BP checkup at clinic is not possible. Shift to self-BP monitoring. Irregular monitoring of BP may increase risk of complications, mortality. Proper diagnosis of hypertension is difficult. The associated risk factors worsen the conditions. Comorbidities further worsen the conditions. I think they should go for telemedicine. As we all know, ACE and ARBs can be continued. There is no problem with that. So a lot of apps are available now for telemedicine. Patients should be encouraged to go for telemedicine and control their blood pressure, because the mortality is very high in patients with uncontrolled blood pressure if they develop COVID. So to summarize, CVD is the leading cause of mortality and morbidity worldwide. Hypertension is the major cause of CVD. Hypertension is associated with various comorbidities like diabetes, CKD, stroke, dyslipidemia, CAD. Various management strategies are recommended by recent guidelines to manage comorbidities in hypertensive patients. Due to lockdown effect, hypertensives face various challenges. Self-BP monitoring is useful to monitor BP regularly. Use of telemedicine is the best way to prevent complications associated with hypertension with comorbidities during lockdown. So I think that concludes my talk, and I would like to hand over the baton to the next speaker as per the program schedule. Thank you very much. I'll join you for the question answer session at the end of the program.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Dr. Rajiv sir, you are please unmute yourself.
Okay, 1 minute. Yeah, I have unmuted. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So Dr. Nagendra giving his talk now in patients with diabetes.
Yes. Is it visible, sir? Clear?
Yes.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the IPCA and all the organizers and all the technical team members for giving me this opportunity today to talk about the diabetes management during COVID-19 era. So it's a growing pandemic of COVID-19. Almost more than 1 crore people are affected across the world, and the number is increasing further, and almost more than 6 lakh people are affected in India. So the risk of infection is increasing day to day. And the worst outcomes can be seen with the comorbid conditions, especially with the diabetes, hypertension, and CKD and cardiovascular disease patients. Coming to the burden of diabetes in India, almost 77 million people are affected with diabetes as of 2019, and the number is increasing day to day. Almost 4 crores people are affected with diabetes, but they don't know that they are diabetic. Again, this is a very important problem because they are unaware of their diabetic, they don't take proper care about the diet and exercise. Of course, they don't know about how to manage diabetes because they are not non-diabetic. So these are the major challenges because the number of diabetes is increasing day to day and the prevalence is very high with our diabetic patients. And with the COVID-19, because it's rapidly increasing day to day. So these are the two major challenges if the patient suffering with diabetes is affected with COVID. So there is a lot of evidence about the risk of COVID complications is high with the underlying diabetes as well as hypertension, cardiovascular disease. So what happens when people living with diabetes are sick? So immediately there is, even with minor illness, there is a dangerous levels of high glucose levels because of the sudden surge of the counter-regulatory hormones, especially the cortisol levels and glucagon epinephrines. So catecholamine surge that will increases the glucose levels very rapidly. And of course, the other triggering factors like stress, anxiety, depression. So with the diabetes as well as with the COVID infection, the hormones rise during this illness, so causes the deranged metabolism. So they may sometimes land up in diabetes emergencies like diabetic ketoacidosis as well as hyperosmolar state. So patients with diabetes have increased risk of severe complications like respiratory distress syndrome, multi-organ failure. Diabetes was identified as a major contributor to disease severity and mortality in COVID patients. So what is the hypothesis for increased incidence and increased severity of complications with COVID in diabetic patients? So number one is the decrease in the innate immunity, and this is decreased phagocytosis, and there is decrease in neutrophil chemotaxis. Cell-mediated immunity is also affected. So this will lead to overall decrease in innate immunity. So these diabetic patients are at high risk for the COVID complications. And this particularly seen in patients, those who are having poor glycemic control. So there are also some observational studies, even in pre-diabetic patients also the COVID complications are high. That shows what is the importance of strict glycemic control to prevent COVID complications as well as the other long-term complications of diabetes. Diabetes in older age is associated with serious disease and increased mortality. So along with the other comorbid conditions, as previous speakers said, the diabetes along with the hypertension, CKD, and some patients have underlying CAD, some patients have heart failure. So diabetes itself is a major risk factor for the cardiovascular disease. So along with the other comorbid conditions will further increase the complications with the COVID and it increases the mortality. So this is I got the message in the WhatsApp. COVID causes sugar spike, docs for it. So this is from the doctors from the Mumbai. They have observed that the patients not in case of diabetic, they are coming with the COVID symptoms, and after diagnosis of COVID, they on the evaluation as a part of routine evaluation, they found that they are having very high sugars. So almost they are observing 300, 400 sugars. It can be because of the pre-existing diabetes that is exacerbated with the COVID infection because of there is a cytokine storm or inflammatory state, and insulin resistance will further aggravate the glucose levels. So what are the causes of glucose fluctuations in diabetes and COVID patients? So it can be mainly because of the irregular diet and reduced exercise, because so these patients are in home isolation or in a hospital isolation. So GI symptoms, and sometimes they present with diarrhea, nausea, and vomiting. It will affect the dietary intake, and this resulting in glucose fluctuations. Some patients may have poor dietary intake, they will land up in hypoglycemia. So stress conditions like there is a surge in the glucocorticoid secretion, the use of glucocorticoid in the treatment of COVID with a severe ARDS. So recently we know that dexamethasone has a good role in the prevention of the cytokine storm as well as the ARDS like complications. So the use of glucocorticoids in the higher doses in diabetic patients will further increase the glucose levels. There may be interruption of the standard OAD therapy during isolation in the home or during the isolation in the wards. So that will resulting in glucose fluctuations. Fear, anxiety, and tension may increase glucose levels and induces glucose fluctuations. And COVID-19 can cause human body to produce a large number of inflammatory cytokines, this resulting in insulin resistant state. It leads to extreme stress in some severe and critical patients. So all this will contribute to the glucose fluctuations in diabetes and COVID patients. So good glycemic control is very, very important to prevent the COVID-19 complications in diabetic patients. So it will trigger the hyperglycemic hormones resulting in elevated glucose levels and diabetes complications. So the optimum therapeutic strategy is very important, and your optimal glucose control should be based on clinical classification, because each diabetic patient is different from their profile, because the age of the patient may be different and duration of diabetes is different, and the insulin reserve, and what is the glucose control prior to the effect of COVID. So since last 3 months especially, so the recent glycemic control all depends upon their coexisting comorbidities like CKD, CAD, or other cardiovascular disease, and age of the patients. Elderly patients are obviously at the high risk for the COVID complications. So it's all depends upon the patient individual profile. So duration of diabetes, age of the patient, and comorbid conditions. What is the strict glycemic control they have? Are they suffering with any recurrent episodes of hyperglycemia in the past 1 year? So all these glycemic excursions and glycemic variability will resulting in a poor outcome in COVID patients. So that is the reason we should go for the good glycemic control with the regular glucose monitoring. So if the patient is in home isolation, they should go for the self-monitoring of glucose with the use of glucometer, or we can opt for the continuous glucose monitoring system devices which are available in the market. So with the regular glucose monitoring in hospital as well as in isolation in the house, in ICU wards, so frequent glucose monitoring will help us to guide the proper management with the use of insulin or OADs. So blood glucose should be controlled for all patients during hospitalization to monitor the progress of illness and avoid aggravation. So it's the main aim of our treatment is to have a good glycemic control, and they should avoid hyperglycemia. Simultaneously, they should avoid hyperglycemic excursions. So strict glycemic control will help to prevent the complications of COVID. So these are the treatment strategies for the patient with diabetes and irregular as well as during COVID. So they have to continue their regular medication. If they're oral anti-diabetic drugs, they can continue. If they're taking insulins, injectable therapy like GLP-1 receptor agonists, they can continue. And they have to seek immediate medical attention if they're suffering with the signs and symptoms of COVID-19, and they will go for the proper assessments for the screening as well as the confirmation of the COVID. And then if they turn out to be positive, they should be treated as per the guidelines. And if they are asymptomatic, so the sugars are under control as per the latest guidelines from the regulatory authorities. So whether they can go for the isolation in the home, and if there are symptoms with the COVID are mild symptomatic, so they can continue with the oral antidiabetic drugs. If the symptoms are high, moderate to severe, if they have severe breathlessness and they need to stop the oral antidiabetic drugs, they should be hospitalized and they should be in the ICU wards for the glycemic control as well as for the maintenance of the respiratory function. So continuous monitoring glucose is very, very important with the capillary blood glucose with the use of glucometers, and they should regularly check for the hyperglycemia. So if the condition is worsening, then definitely they have to consult in the emergency room. This is the step-by-step management of diabetes patients with COVID-19 infection. So in case a person with diabetes suffering with any fever, cough, or running nose or dyspnea, the health authority needs to be notified, especially the COVID testing centers they should approach. The affected person needs isolation for the 14 days minimum. If they have any complications, it may require further hospitalization. So anti-hyperglycemic agents that can cause volume depletion and those anti-diabetic drugs can cause hypoglycemia should be avoided, because these patients are at risk for the hypoglycemia and volume depletion. So dosage of oral anti-diabetic drugs may need to be reduced or may need to be adjusted, depends upon the response. And patients should follow sick day guidelines and may need more frequent monitoring of glucose so that we can adjust the dose as per the glucose levels. So healthcare providers should continue to follow the routine diabetes management guidelines, encourage patients to follow lifestyle modification within the bounds of lockdown, along with the regular medication. So compliance to the medication is very, very important. And counsel people with diabetes about the potential risk of the COVID-19 severity in diabetic patients, especially those not having good glycemic control, and re-emphasize public health prevention measures such as hand hygiene, social distancing, and wearing masks, etc. These diabetic patients should take extra care because they are at high risk for the COVID complications, and they should avoid the exposure at the maximum extent. So what are the appropriate use of anti-diabetic drugs in COVID-19 patients? So drugs which can cause volume depletion or hypoglycemia are best to avoid it in smaller doses because there is glycemic excursions and volume depletion. These patients are prone for the dehydration and hypotension. So like SGLT inhibitors that can cause volume depletion. And insulin appears to be the most appropriate option for these patients for the glycemic control because as such there is no contraindication for the insulin in any diabetic patients except hypersensitivity. So the insulin regimen depends upon the glucose response. The patient is having very high glycemic excursions. They may require basal bolus therapy, like bolus insulin 3 times a day with the basal insulin at bedtime. So some patients may require IV insulin for the continuous IV insulin infusion. So they need more frequent monitoring. And if the patient is taking the treatment at the home, they may go for the advanced insulin like co-formulations. We have insulin degludec as well as insulin aspart co-formulation. 30-70 formulations that can be given once daily or twice daily. So these co-formulations and advanced immune insulin analogs will have less risk of hypoglycemia compared to the conventional insulins. These options should be given to the patients. They should explain for the importance of glycemic control and how to manage hypoglycemia if they have any hypoglycemic episodes. So like symptoms of hypoglycemia like headache, giddiness or shivering, tremulousness or increased hunger, so severe weakness. So at that time, they should go for the glucose testing. And if they found that there is any low sugar levels, at least less than 70, we can consider as a hypoglycemia. And then immediately they have to take some glucose or some candies to improve the glucose levels, or they can take food intake later on, and they need to adjust the dose and they have to consult the doctor. So coming to the common antidiabetic drugs which are using routinely is the metformin. Obviously, metformin is the first line antidiabetic drug for any diabetic patients. So there is no there is no issues with the metformin, but if the patient creatinine is very high, the GFR is less than 30, metformin is contraindicated. In the patients, those who are on ventilators and those patients having severe breathlessness, so metformin should be avoided because there is a risk of lactic acidosis with the metformin. So especially in volume depletion patients and hypertension patients, you have to avoid metformin. In general, any hospitalized patients, those who are having moderate to severe symptoms, better to shift to insulin and stop all the OADs. And what is the advantage of metformin? If the patient is already on metformin, the sugars are under control and the patient don't have any severe symptoms. In mild symptoms of COVID or asymptomatic COVID patients, we can continue metformin because the advantage is there is no risk of hypoglycemia with metformin. So coming to the next group of antidiabetic drugs, that is SGLT2 inhibitors. So this is a novel class of antidiabetic drugs, so which have proven cardiovascular benefit as well as renal benefits. So use with caution in COVID patients because they cause some fluid loss and it will contribute to the volume depletion or hypotension. So there is a high incidence of diabetic ketoacidosis. So especially this can be seen in relative insulin deficiency patients. Those who are having low insulin reserves, they are prone for the diabetic ketoacidosis. So any acute illness or any acute stress event can trigger the DKA. So in these patients in COVID, diagnosed with COVID patients because of lot of stress and lot of cytokine storm, these patients are prone for the diabetic ketoacidosis. So these we should keep in mind, especially if they have moderate to severe symptoms of COVID. So otherwise, SGLT inhibitors can be continued if there is asymptomatic patients. So if you have any better alternative drugs, we can shift over to the insulin or the other DP4 inhibitors. Coming to the next class of antidiabetics, these are the DP4 inhibitors. We can continue DP4 inhibitors safely because there is no risk of hypoglycemia or very low risk of hypoglycemia with these agents. And the advantages of DP4 inhibitors, and there is no volume depletion. So in most of the DP4 inhibitors, there is no need of any dose adjustment for even in CKD patients. So some DP4 inhibitors need to adjust the dose. For example, linagliptin 5 mg we can continue even in CKD patients, and sitagliptin we need to reduce the dose to 50 mg once daily if the GFR is less than 50. So except these few considerations, we can continue DP4 inhibitors, and some evidence is there about the role of DP4 inhibitors in inflammation COVID patients. So DP4 enzyme is present in the respiratory epithelial cells. So the inhibition of this enzyme with the DP4 inhibitors has some improvement in COVID complications. It reduces some severity of the complications, and it also reduces the inflammation because of the COVID. So this is one favorable effect with the DP4 inhibitors, but still there is no substantial evidence to support this as the prevention of the COVID complications. So coming to the pioglitazone, this is an insulin sensitizer. There is no risk of hypoglycemia with the pioglitazone alone. It can cause hypoglycemia if you are using with any other drugs like sulfonylureas and insulins. So it significantly reduces the insulin resistance, and it also has role in decreasing the inflammation. So this is a favorable effect in diabetic patients with COVID complications. So these are the various commonly used drugs. And coming to the sulfonylureas, I have not mentioned here, sulfonylureas with smaller doses. So we can continue those doses with if the patient is asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic. So if the patient is suffering with the recurrent episodes of hypoglycemia, we need to decrease the dose of sulfonylureas. Nowadays, we are using newer generation sulfonylureas like glimepiride and gliclazide extended release forms. So we need to adjust the dose of these drugs, especially if there is a symptomatic, mildly symptomatic or asymptomatic. So if the sugars are stable, we can continue the same regimen, but they need to monitor regularly. So recommendations for the COVID-19 and metabolic disease outpatient care, the prevention of infection in diabetic patients, sensitization of people with diabetes for optimum metabolic control. So good glycemic control is very, very important, and optimization of current therapy, and caution with premature discontinuation of established therapy. There are chances of discontinuation of medication. So utilization of telemedicine and connected health models, if possible, to maintain maximum self-containment so that we can avoid the risk of exposure. So coming to inpatient care or ICU care with the diabetes and COVID, glucose monitoring, very important, frequent glucose monitoring and electrolytes monitoring, monitor for the ketones and ABG, because these patients are prone for the DKA. Liberal indication for the early IV insulin is very important, especially in severe cases like ARDS or hyperinflammatory state or multi-organ dysfunction patients. It will help in exact dose titration. It also avoids glycemic excursions. So better to avoid subcutaneous regimen because there is a very variable absorption in hypotension or hypovolemic shock patients. So IV insulin continuous infusion is the gold standard therapy for most of the critical care patients, so that we will continue with the COVID patients also. Coming to the sick day rules, this is very important. We should discuss about what is the target of the glucose levels for the patients to avoid any complications. We should go for the strict glycemic control, so as far as possible. And meanwhile, there should not be any episodes of hyperglycemia. So we all know that hyperglycemia is a major barrier for the management of diabetes. So if the patient is not on drugs which known to cause hypoglycemia, we can go up to the A1C of 6.5. So, and if the patient is at risk for the recurrent hypoglycemia, we can target around 7 or 7.2, depends upon the age of the patient and the risk of hypoglycemia. So then individual, we have to target the glucose levels, and depends upon the patient profile. Then how to adjust the dose depends upon the glycemic response. We can adjust plus or minus to insulin, so whenever they're necessary. So then when to contact the healthcare personnel, we should encourage all the patients to have a regular glucose monitoring, as well as they should warn about the critical symptoms, like if the patient feeling dry mouth or thirsty and passing large amounts of urine, like polyuria and polydipsia, or the patient suffering with shortness of breath or pain abdomen or vomitings. These are the symptoms of diabetic ketoacidosis, and these patients should immediately they should come to the emergency room. And if the patient with type 1 diabetes, they should regularly check their ketone levels as well as the glucose levels. And they also should have a properly hydrated, and they should avoid the dehydration to prevent the complications. So in OPD management, we can triage and phone. All patients must be assessed for the possible COVID-19 infection, especially for the diabetes clinics. So because any infected patients may transmit the infection in diabetic clinics. So if they don't have any symptoms of COVID, they can call to the clinic. In diabetic clinic especially, you should avoid crowding at the clinic to prevent cross infections. If any patient seems to be COVID-19 suspect, please refer him to the nearby COVID testing center, because only regulatory authorities giving permission to the few centers about the COVID testing. And avoid routine follow-ups. If there is any minor adjustments, we can do it on telemedicine. So guide the patient and phone for the minor issues at your discretion. So if there is minor adjustments or any few queries about the management of diabetes, we can manage on phone with the use of telemedicine, or we can use with any digital platforms. Clinic management, we should avoid the workload in the clinic and all patients only, and we should avoid the relatives or attendants if possible, because the risk of infection is increasing with the number of patients when the crowd is there. And it is very important to maintain the social distance about 1 meter minimum. So we can make squares, or we can ask the patient to sit in between 2 chairs gap, and we can maintain at least 2 meters is the ideal. We should 6 feet distance we should maintain. And the patient need to be examined. We have to clean the table, And immediately after examining the patient, we have to dispose our gloves, and we have to clean the examination table and all the equipment which we are using for the examination. So in clinic management, all the patients made to wear a mask in the waiting area and in addition to on cough and sneeze agent. So clinic should be well ventilated to minimize the risk and minimize the exposure. And of course, the doctor should wear a mask and scrub hands with soap and water and sanitizers the examination of each patient. These are the minimal protective gears for the OPD in the healthcare workers. So triple layer mask with the pharmacist and nurses. The advanced protective gears for the OPD, like we can go for the especially doctors and nurses. They can use N95 mask in the clinics and as well as goggles, gowns and gloves. So similarly, these depends upon the attending patients. They should obviously go for the advanced protective gears to minimize the exposure. So what are the challenges for the diabetic patients during COVID-19 due to lockdown? The most important is the regular blood glucose monitoring is not possible because not able to access to the laboratory diagnosis centers, and they are not able to access to the hospitals because of the transport problem. And the patients, those who are staying at rural areas and the remote areas, they are not able to come to the regular glucose monitoring or laboratory evaluation. So lack of access to diabetes specialists and educators. So, and there is a proper problem with the appropriate use of various anti-diabetic drugs because so whether to continue the medication and if there is sugars are high, what to do, they don't know. So these are the challenges during lockdown. So how to overcome these challenges, I will explain next slides. So then analyzing blood glucose levels and further dosage is very, very important for the healthcare providers because during COVID-19, we have observed that the most of the patients, because of the stress and fear, anxiety, depression, lack of sleep, these patients are having high levels of glucose fluctuations as well as there is increase in the blood pressure levels. So we need to adjust the dose of the glucose levels, and we have to reassure that the patients with the good glycemic control, they don't have any increased complications with the COVID. So this will help in their glucose to maintain the glucose levels. So analyzing patient medication adherence is also very, very important. Compliance to the medication is very, very important for any diabetic patients or any chronic disorder patient because they sometimes skip the medication because of the various reasons, because of the financial issues or because of the not able to go to the pharmacy for the fear of the exposure to the infection. So with these common causes, they may stop the taking medication. So what are the ways to overcome the challenges in diabetes care during lockdown? First important is we can go for the SMBG with the using glucose monitoring device like glucometers. So we have advanced glucometers now, the costing around 1,500 to 2,500 in general. So we encourage them to purchase the glucometer and they can monitor the glucose at their home so that we can minimize the exposure to the labs and we can minimize the exposure to the outside environment. And similarly, it helps in the adjustment of the proper doses. And meanwhile, they will have a psychological support that if they are good glycemic control, the well-being will be increased. And the use of technology-based interventions like CGMS, and we can go for the telemedicine. Appropriate use of anti-diabetic drugs is very important and depends upon the patient response. We can go for the appropriate use of anti-diabetic drugs, and some patients may require insulin to control the glucose levels. So how SMBG will help? So it helps in adjusting therapeutic regimen, especially those patients are taking insulin. So these patients are prone for the hypoglycemia, and the patients, those who are taking sulfonylurea, these patients are prone for the recurrent hypoglycemia. So this will help in therapeutic regimen. So it helps to regulate the dietary intake. So once they know that this particular type of food, especially high carbohydrate, increasing the glucose levels, then next day immediately they will cut short their carbohydrate intake. And also it helps in encouraging the physical activity, and it improves glycemic control and helps in decrease the glycemic variability. So it also helps in prevention of severe hypoglycemia because immediately if they have the symptoms of hypoglycemia, they will cross-check it with the glucometer, and once they diagnose with the hypoglycemia, they will immediately take some glucose, some carbohydrates, so that they will increase the glucose levels so immediately. So because this is very important, because hyperglycemia itself can cause giddiness or weakness. Severe hyperglycemia around 300 and 400 can cause hypoglycemia. Hyperglycemia can cause giddiness or weakness. So severe hypoglycemia also sometimes presents with severe weakness or giddiness. So it is very difficult to differentiate between these two sometimes. So glucometer SMBG will helps to differentiate whether the patient is having severe hypoglycemia or hyperglycemia. So we have other devices like continuous glucose monitoring systems, CGMS. So it helps continuous monitoring of glucose levels at least once in every, depends upon the device which you are using. Though we can have the reading between 5 to 10 minutes, once in 5 to 10 minutes. And it provides retrospective as well as the real-time information about the hypoglycemic as well as hyperglycemic excursions, so that we can modify the therapeutic regimen. So when to increase the dose of insulin, for example, morning dose, sometimes may need to increase the dose, and sometimes if there is nocturnal hypoglycemia, we need to decrease the dose of bedtime insulin. So we need to change the regimen, depends upon the FPG, PPG, and after lunch, after dinner sugars, and early morning sugars. So we can alter the therapeutic regimen. And so it also helps in hypoglycemia. It also helps in to whether the patient is suffering with any glycemic variability. So role of technology for diabetes care during lockdown, we can use for the telemedicine, for remote consultations. We can use mobile apps, and we can also use electronic medical records. We can transfer to the mail, so that we can analyze the entire records like any CGMS records, so that we can also discuss with our colleagues if there is any issues. So with these advanced technology, we can have a better healthcare for the patients, especially those who are staying at their homes or in isolation, or those patients who are not able to access because of the issues with the lockdown. So how is technology benefiting diabetes care? Telemedicine can break the geographical barrier and allow more doctor-patient interaction. So electronic medical records allows for the data storage and quick evidence for the patient, in the especially past history and the previous records. And mobile apps also allow for the better tracking of the glucose as well as the patient data. So all this will help in better glycemic control as well as overall healthcare. So this is the typical telehealth system for diabetic patient at home. So patient will be at home and they can monitor with the use of glucometers, and we can have the weighing machine, so they can check the weight. And similarly, we have the home BP monitoring systems, so they can record the blood pressure and they can record the glucose levels, and they can see all the basic parameters of for the examination. They can email, or we can send through the WhatsApp, or we can send the messages to the diabetologists or dietitians, nurses, and technical support. So at the center, we have the team of the doctors like diabetologists, endocrinologists, dietitians, as well as nurses and technical support. These dietitians will give the counseling about the diet, importance of diet, and how to take the proper diet, especially to improve their nutrition part, and to obviously the proper balanced diet helps in the improve their immunity. So it is plays a major role. And nurses, so how to take their insulin techniques, and all those diabetes educator will take care of the how to take the insulin, how to preserve the insulin. So technical support will help to how to send their mails, how to send their data to the doctors. So obviously with all this team of workers, and we can manage the diabetic patient at their home. So advantages of telemedicine, we have the virtual patient-physician appointments. So it improves the access to the physicians in rural as well as the patients who are taking at remote areas, and it helps in monitoring complications. So especially hypoglycemia and severe hyperglycemia, and diabetes education with the help of the diabetes educator. So it also improves the medication adherence, and behavior therapy and counseling. It is very, very important because of behavior therapy. So some patients will have depression and anxiety. So we have to encourage them to go for the regular medication and regular monitoring, so that they will have a good glycemic control. So ultimately, you can have a lesser risk with the COVID-19 complications. So summary of my presentation. Coronavirus is growing pandemic. Day to day, the number of cases are increasing rapidly. So in India as well as the other parts of the world, people with diabetes are at increased risk of the complications with the COVID, especially ARDS and multi-organ dysfunction, because most of the patients have underlying comorbid conditions like CKD, CAD, cardiovascular disease, hypertension. So elderly patients, these patients are at risk, high risk for the complications of COVID. So adherence to the healthy diet and a healthy lifestyle is very, very important. And adherence to the medication and access to the healthcare facilities through the telemedicine. So as well as if necessary, they can come to the clinic. So diabetes clinics, we have to take care over the patients, those are coming to our clinics. So we should prevent the infection from the one COVID patient to the other, so that we can screen the patients. So that is our responsibility to prevent the cross infections among the diabetic patients, those are coming to our clinic. So for that we have to take the precautions in our clinic. Standard protocol, self-monitoring of glucose is very, very important, and measures such as telemedicine and EMR will help in glycemic control. and we need to adjust the dose depends upon the glycemic response, and we need to adjust the dose of insulin. And appropriate use of anti-diabetic medication is very, very important. And it's all depends upon the individualized approach, and each patient is very different. So patient-centric approach is very, very important. And we have to give the appropriate therapeutic regimen for the patient, depends upon the patient profile. With this, I conclude my presentation. Thanks for your patience hearing. Now I hand over to the session to the next speaker.
So Dr. Pramod will be talking on home BP monitoring. Over to Dr. Pramod, and then we'll go for discussion.
Good morning, Dr. Mukesh sir and Rajiv Gati sir and Nagendra sir. Hello, I am audible. Hello.
Yes, sir. It is audible, very much audible.
Good morning, everybody. Today, my topic is home blood pressure monitoring during COVID patients in the pandemic area. Next slide. Next slide. In coronavirus pandemic, people are being forced to stay at home to help curb the spread of the virus. At a time like this, it is important.
Sir, I request, could you just speak little loud?
Now audible. Hello. At a time this, it is important that people with underlying conditions like hypertension, diabetes, they should take extra care of their health. People with comorbidities like hypertension, diabetes are at higher risk of infection, which can be life-threatening. Controlling BP is very important during this period because of this COVID pandemic. Next slide. Next slide.
There will be a lag of 3 to 5 seconds because I think net ka problem. Next slide, please.
Hypertension and BP monitoring. Hypertension increases the risk of heart attack and stroke, renal failure, and heart failure, and is the leading prevalence risk factor for global cardiovascular disease burden to the world. Studies lack consistently in the reporting BP measurement, and some do not even provide details on how BP monitoring was performed. Office BP measurement is associated with several disadvantages like large variability in reading. Alternative technology for measurement of office BP, ambulatory BP monitoring. It is worked by the patient over a 24 hours period with multiple measurements and are considered the gold standard for a BP measurement. The average and multiple measurement at home tends to be lower and is more reproducible than clinical measurement. It also has an advantage of measuring the nocturnal BP, thus allowing the detection of attendant dip during the night.
Dr. Pramod, you should speak loudly, I think.
Sir, are you hearing, sir? No? Home monitoring blood pressure measurement is an effective and convenient means of screening for hypertension. Home monitoring BP measurement uses the same technology as ABPM monitoring. Before slide, this is not. ABPM provides BP information in ambulatory blood monitoring provides BP monitoring information at many time points in a day during unrestricted daily activities, but home monitoring BP measurement provides BP information under fixed times and conditions for a long period. The conceptual difference between the home monitoring BP measurement and ambulatory BP measurement. Ambulatory BP measurement typically it records for 24 hours a period, but in home BP monitoring, typically every day for several days to weeks. Ambulatory blood pressure monitoring measures BP typically during the awake and sleep periods. But the home monitoring BP measurement typically it awake that when the patient is awake periods only. Ambulatory blood pressure monitoring measures BP while a person undergoes regular activities like sleeping during activities also. But the home monitoring blood measurement we can record it with only patient and resting position and seated position only. The patient are typically not shown BP reading on ABPM, whereas they are usually aware the home monitoring BP readings. BP measurement on ambulatory measurement BP measurement are obtained automatically with the device, whereas BP measurement are triggered manually by the patient on home monitoring blood pressure management. The advantages and limitations of home blood pressure monitoring. Advantages include blood pressure monitoring taken multiple readings over an extended period of time. Avoids white coat reaction to BP measurement. It is reproducible. Predicts the CV morbidity and mortality better than the office BP measurement. Because when the patient, we are measuring the BP in office, it may be high because of anxiety and tension. They can diagnose white coat and mask hypertension, allows the patient better understand hypertension management. Telemonitoring allows the remote monitoring by healthcare professionals. The limitations for the blood pressure monitoring of home, some devices have been found to be inaccurate. Cuff placement can affect accuracy. It may induce anxiety in excessive monitoring. The risk of treatment change by patients based on casual home measurement without doctor's guidance. Lack of longitudinal recording, not yet reimbursed by insurance companies in many countries. Next slide. Accuracy of the home blood pressure monitors. Accuracy of device remains a limiting factor associated with the home blood pressure monitoring. In 2009 study to determine the accuracy of 54 automated home blood pressure monitoring devices, only 30% devices were found to have acceptable validation, while 72% of the automated monitors were inaccurate. The frequency of accuracy was higher among the validated devices compared to the non-validated devices. In addition, a 2005 analysis of 30 studies found that the accuracy of most devices tends to decrease higher BP levels. Next slide. The recommendations for the use of home blood pressure monitoring. NICE guidelines recommended that when using the home blood pressure monitoring to confirm the diagnosis of hypertension, it is necessary to ensure that for each BP recording, 2 consecutive measurements are taken, at least apart from the person seated. BP is recorded twice daily, ideally in the morning and evening, and it is BP recording continues at least 4 days, ideally for 7 days. Measurements taken on the first day, it should be discarded, and the average value of the remaining days after day 1 is discarded to be used. Finger and wrist devices are less accurate and are not recommended unless brachial measurements are difficult or impossible to obtain. Next slide. Accurate measurement of home blood pressure monitoring. In order to measure BP accurately, the cuff must be wrapped correctly and proper posture of the patient during the measurement is essential. If the cuff is wrapped incorrectly, then the result is less accurate. In addition, irregular pulse due to arrhythmias lead to inaccurate BP recording. See the patient, the cuff and the heart, it should be at heart level, and the feet should be touch the floor, back support, it should be there. Next slide. Latest development of HPPM technology. Home blood pressure monitoring technology. IntelliWrap cuff technology. This features a longer inflatable area with the cuff that wraps all the way around the arm. This reduces the pressure loss on brachial artery, increasing the acceptable range of placement and thus reducing the impact of cuff placement on accuracy. Next. Summary and conclusion. The growing burden of hypertension has an increase in use and availability of home blood pressure monitoring devices. Home blood pressure monitoring provides extensive BP information, often under fixed time frames and conditions for a longer period. Thus, the mean values of home blood pressure monitoring are stable and reproducible or high. The use of home blood pressure monitoring device is cost effective and has stronger prognostic value in terms of CV risk when compared with the clinical BP measurement. Home blood pressure monitoring is easy to incorporate into a normal daily routine and accuracy assess response to hypertensive therapy and enable remote consultations by use of telemonitoring. It also appears to be valuable as in assessing the patient at a risk who would not usually be considered as potentially benefiting from treatment. I'm really thankful to IPCA Pharma Company and all others.
Rajiv sir, please unmute yourself.
I am audible?
Yes, sir.
Sir, you are audible.
Yeah, yeah. So now let us go to the chat box. I think we have received few questions and Dr. Mukesh has already started answering them. Let me just go through. Already Dr. Mukesh has answered a lot of questions, but let me see if there is anything remaining.
I think they are basically regarding COVID and nutrition. So I just thought I'll.
Yeah. Nice. So that you have finished a lot of it.
So we can discuss those answers.
Yeah. One was red flag stage 1 tachycardia, neutrophil count more than 3.5, exercise-induced desaturation, raised CRP. If you can share the number, we can share you the app. This was the answer given by Dr. Mukesh, and I think that should be okay. Then second is vitamin supplementation, mouth gargle, breathing exercise, pranayama being used positively. They improve the immunity along with immune booster drugs like airway protection, breathing exercise, butterfly, fluid maintenance and hydration. Yes, you have to do all of these. Then management of remdesivir and remdesivir is used for management in the acutely ill patients. Is manufactured by two pharmaceuticals at the moment, Cipla and Hetero, and they are used in acutely ill patients. And Fabifar is used in mild to moderate symptoms. It is marketed by Glenmark company. The cost of therapy for remdesivir is about 5,000 rupees per day, and Previfru is about 12,500 for the whole course. And effective broad spectrum antiviral, we should know that. Any other questions which you can see, Mukesh?
I think that's it.
Basically, I think people are more interested in COVID now. A lot of scare.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. The role of D-dimer estimation in management of COVID-19. Yes, COVID is a hypercoagulable state. So D-dimer gives an indirect evidence. It's a measure of thrombotic state as the parameters used to consider in the diagnosis of COVID diagnosis. Then experience of using Fabiflu and remdesivir. At the moment, I do not have, but a critical care team has started using Fabiflu. Remdesivir will be available from July 8th, if I am not wrong, by Cipla. That's what is my information. But personally, I have not used these drugs. But both of the drugs are broad spectrum antiviral. Any other question, Mukesh? Can you see? So many types of digital BP instruments available in the market. Patient usually go for cheaper. So is there any standard? WHO approved is Omron. I think you should use Omron BP apparatus up to my knowledge. But other instruments you can calibrate according to the availability. But WHO recommendation is Omron.
Only thing is, as Rajiv said, it has all BPI apparatus have to be calibrated every year. So there are companies which do this calibration. Every one of us should have that numbers. What we do is we routinely get it done or give it to the hospital when they do yearly servicing. We have to get those machines serviced as well. There's another company, Switzerland company, that's also good actually. I think Aries has provided. So Omron and the other one, both are quite okay. But only thing is calibration regularly. That is the key.
In today's corona scenario, what are the specific measures to be taken by hypertensive diabetic patients? The most important, as everyone is telling, maintain good immunity levels, maintain proper hydration, keep proper social distancing, use of mask. If you use mask between a patient having COVID and yourself, the chances of infection are reduced by only 99%. But if a patient is having mask and you are not having, you have 30% chance of infection. And if the patient does not have mask, your chance of getting infection is more than 100%. And even if you wear mask and patient not wearing mask, it is about 30%. So you should be very careful. Both of you should wear the mask and maintain social distancing. Any other question? Can you see? Nagendra, I would personally like to ask you, what is the role of pioglitazone in this infective conditions and diabetes management? Because pioglitazone for cardiologists is scary because of fluid accumulation.
So pioglitazone is known to cause weight gain and fluid retention, pedal edema, and it can cause osteoporosis and increase the fracture risk. So these are the main disadvantages with the use of pioglitazone. And the advantages are, it is cheaper, it is insulin sensitizer, it is a very effective drug. So these are advantages. But in heart failure patient, we should be with caution. We should avoid these molecules in heart failure patients, or in general, any CAD patients. And there is some evidence about the role of pioglitazone in any inflammatory state. So in hepatitis C, NAFLD, in these patients, pioglitazone is known to reduce the inflammation. So with some evidence of reduction of inflammation, so probably this may also help in any other viral infection in general. So by decreasing inflammatory state, it has a role. But in general, pioglitazone is lost in hierarchy in any diabetic management.
There is one question. Best anti-hypertension drug in COVID, CCB versus ARB. Now, there is always a doubt expressed because the entry of COVID viruses with attraction to ACE2 receptors, but the guidelines say the role of ARB usage does not change with the COVID infection. So you can continue using ARBs. And in a hypertensive situation, if the blood pressure is moderate to severe, calcium channel blockers are to be used. But in mild to moderate hypertension, I think ARB still can be used. Does COVID-19 has a direct impact on level of hypertension? A question asked. I don't think it has a direct impact on hypertension. The changes in the level of hypertension because of COVID-19 only is the anxiety. Probably that increases systolic hypertension, but I don't think it has a role on what you said, diastolic BP. Any anti-diabetic drug of choice in COVID? Dr. Nagendra, you should be able to answer.
Such, yes, sir. As such, there is no any special anti-diabetic drug of choice for diabetes management during COVID. But we have to individualize the therapy depends upon the patient profile. So in general, metformin is the initial line of treatment for any diabetic patients because low risk of hypoglycemia. If the patient with COVID and hospitalization or patient with COVID moderate to severe symptoms, insulin is the best choice. Because with insulin, we can achieve a rapid glycemic control.
So I think it answers.
So are you able to hear, sir? Is it okay?
Yeah.
So insulin is the best choice. If
probably it's okay.
Insulin is a better choice if the patient has moderate to severe symptoms of COVID, as well as in any hospitalized patient or ICU patients. Insulin is because the rapid glycemic control we can achieve, so we can adjust the dose depends upon the glycemic response.
Yes. Now, Dr. Shyam Prasad, is Rami available in tablet form? No, Remdesivir is not available in tablet form. And are they using in Hyderabad? It will be available by Cipla from July 8th. I think Hetero is giving the drugs, but directly from the to the hospital. They are not giving through the CNF agent, so you cannot get it on a retail basis. Then ivermectin in COVID, there was a
maybe Dr. Pramod sir could be his physician.
study which showed some improvement in immunity. Bangladesh, but it's
Sir, you can comment on. You can
Yeah.
unmute yourself, sir.
unmute yourself, Pramod. You should comment on ivermectin role in COVID. Unmute yourself, Pramod. Pramod, you should unmute.
Host can only do that.
Somebody
Host should do it.
somebody from DigiMax should unmute Pramod sir. Yeah.
Yeah. So role of ivermectin in COVID. Pramod sir to answer.
Sir, we are using the ivermectin when the patients are mild to moderate one. We are using, but results are good, sir.
Mechanism of action. How does it help to overcome your management and disease? It was basically a study from Bangladesh where they have used it, and it improves the immunity according to the best of my knowledge. But I might be. You can correct me, whoever is better informed about the drug in COVID. Any other question? Can you see Mukesh?
Pramod sir is answering, but he is muted again.
Oh, Pramod, just unmute yourself.
Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah,
sir.
now you're unmuted.
Your experience with COVID, red flags, whatever. Yeah, we can hear you, sir.
Dr. Pramod, you should answer red flags and COVID and
I think there's some connectivity issue, sir.
no problem. Fine. Okay. Internet is being used optimally, rather over optimally. Probably this speed is not enough for India.
True, sir.
Because all people are working from home, IT people, all IT is working from home.
Very true, sir.
And you're all conducting webinars left, right, and center.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
Pramod, can you answer these questions, few questions on COVID-19 and your experience? Red flags, ivermectin role.
Sir, with the mild to moderate symptoms are there, azithromycin we are using with ivermectin, and hydroxychloroquine we are using, sir. With that, we are getting good results, sir. And the patient is, when the severe condition only, we are using this antiviral drug, sir. Actually, we are treating the patients mild to only mild cases. We are treating a trauma isolation and drug treatment. And the patient is getting SOB, then only we are checking. They are asking go to the hospital and admit the hospital.
What is the level of SpO2 you recommend hospitalization?
Only when the patient is getting saturations are 92, 90, 91 like that only, and the patient is getting SOB, then we are advising better to go to that hospital. But many patients with 93, 94 also with these drugs we are getting results, sir. But IV that antiviral drugs, the prescribed only we are prescribing when the patient is getting severe, then we are on admission, and better to go for admit, and then we are giving the drugs, sir. But 90% patients are on tablet form with they are recovering, sir. And the patient is having that comorbid conditions, then only they are getting severe complications. That people we are advised to go and admit that admission for we are
Now,
asking for
what is
admission.
your take home on going to work, that is fit to work from after they become COVID positive? What is the time frame? How do you tell that patient is fit to go to work? What are the guidelines say? After he becomes COVID positive, what is the timeline, or how do you assess patient becoming fit to work?
Actually, when many patients they are getting COVID positive patients, sir, but symptoms are less only, sir. They are not correlating with the severity and symptoms, sir. And the patient is having without
Because
symptoms.
employability is questionable. Yeah, employability is questionable, so we should know the time frame when we can permit the patient to go to work when he become infective. You just tell the timeline.
Time means second time we are advising the patients go for one more time test, sir. When the results are negative, then we are advising to go to the workplace.
But in Telangana, up to 6, you are not able to do any test. So in such situations, any guidelines saying they are not allowed to test again.
Sir, one more question is there.
Yeah, please tell Nagendra.
Role of the question from the Dr. Shyam Prasad. The role of metformin in COVID. Any update from? So
Yeah, you can talk on that.
Review on the recent literature about the role of metformin. So what happens during COVID infection? There is a cytokine storm. So with the use of metformin, there is some evidence. The evidence is there to decrease the inflammation, so decrease the cytokine levels. So it acts at the level of AMPK, adenosine monophosphate kinase levels. So through the AMPK pathway, it decreases the inflammation and decreases the cytokine levels. So that COVID severity complications will be less with the use of metformin. There is only some evidence is there about the role of metformin in COVID patients, but we need more data to strongly support substantiate this evidence. So with the other advantage with metformin in mild symptomatic or asymptomatic patients, there is no risk of hypoglycemia. With metformin, we can continue the metformin. So it has also other benefits apart from the glycemic control in the terms of cardiovascular diseases. So I think metformin is a very good option if the patient is able to maintain glucose levels. So the only concern is the risk of lactic acidosis. If the patient is having hypotension or hypovolemia or hypoxia or patients on ventilator, there is increased risk of lactic acidosis. In those patients, we should stop metformin. And similarly, the patient is having multi-organ dysfunction, we have to stop the metformin. The GFR is less than 30, we have to stop the metformin. And the GFR is less, if the patient is symptomatic, we can decrease the dose. So these are the concerns about the metformin. And if, of course, any antidiabetic drugs, we have to individualize the therapy, depends upon the patient profile, and it also depends upon the patient condition from day to, it varies, depends upon the level of the severity. So if the patient is mild symptomatic or moderate symptomatic, severely symptomatic, and patients requiring ventilator, so what is the patient glucose levels, the risk of hypoglycemia, all these things we should consider while choosing antidiabetic medication.
I don't think there are any more questions. What is your opinion, Mr. Avinash?
Yeah, sir, no issues. Then I'll give a closing just thank you remarks.
Yeah. So thank you all the speakers for giving excellent presentation and information on the chat box. Thank you, Mukesh, Nagendra, and Pramod for being a part of this webinar organized by IPCA. We should thank them for the opportunity and giving us an opportunity to interact with our doctors. In this COVID era, we should stay home, stay safe. Thank you. Dr. Avinash can give a vote of thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Once again, a very good afternoon to you all. It was indeed a treat to listen from the stalwarts in cardiology, endocrinology, and medicine today. My heartfelt gratitude and thanks to Dr. Rajiv Garg, sir, for moderating today's webinar and also for his lucid presentation on the role of diuretics in hypertension. Sir has made it very simple and crystal clear. So thank you so much, sir. I am also thankful to Dr. V. Mukesh Rao, sir, for a wonderful presentation on comorbid conditions in CVD patients. My heartfelt thanks to Dr. J. Nagendra, sir, for superb presentation on diabetes management in COVID era. And my sincere thanks to Dr. Pramod Kumar, sir, also, for making topic of home BP monitoring very simple and interactive. So my heartfelt thanks to all of you viewers from all across the country for sparing your time and logging in for this today Sunday morning webinar. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Stay safe, stay happy. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajiv sir. Thank you, Mukesh sir. Thank you, Pramod sir.